I never thought I'd be speeding down the highway in tears at dawn, much less in my wedding dress. But there I was, tires humming on asphalt, the morning sky still inky, stained only by a sliver of rose at the horizon's edge. My brand new shoes pressed against the gas pedal, and my heart thumped so loudly that I worried it might shatter my ribs from the inside. Just 2 hours earlier, I'd been perched on the edge of a plush burgundy velvet chair in the grand drawing room of Hawthorne Manor, clutching a trembling glass of champagne. We were gathered, a motley crew of stunned relations, for the solemn reading of Grandma Evelyn's will, the event we'd all been dreading since last week's phone call. The manor's chandeliers glittered like captive stars, casting a golden glow over Aunt Clara's tiger-tail pearls and Uncle Miles's polished shoes. I'd smiled and nodded through the legal jargon, each clause biting like ice. Who got the silver tea set? Who inherited the cottage in Devon? Who was to serve as executor? My husband, Jonathan, tall, bespectacled, his black hair carefully combed, had sat beside me, his fingers brushing mine under the table. He'd leaned in and whispered, "This can't change anything between us." I'd squeezed his hand and drank another reluctant sip of bubbly. Beside him, his mother, Margaret, sat with rigid propriety, her eyes flicking between the lawyer and her son. I watched her knuckles whiten around her purse strap, the way she always did when she was about to pounce. But as the last envelope was opened, Grandma Evelyn's own personal letter to all of us, an electric hush fell over the room. "To my dearest family," the letter began, in Grandma's loopy script. "I leave more than my treasures. I leave my secrets. And I hope you'll forgive me, and each other, as you discover what lies ahead." The lawyer cleared his throat, and with that, my chest tightened. Margaret rose abruptly, so abruptly that her chair skidded back, excusing herself to make a quick call. She swept from the room, her heels clicking like a metronome of impending doom. I glanced at Jonathan. He rubbed his brow, his glasses crooked. "I'll check on her," he murmured, standing. He followed his mother into the corridor. They vanished behind the double doors that led to the library. The hush lingered, as if our own hearts waited to see what would come next. I felt a jolt, a sudden sickness, and excused myself as well. I told Aunt Clara I needed some air, then bolted for the grand front door. Outside, the manor's gardens were drenched in dew, the roses bowed heavy with droplets. I drew a steadying breath, rubbed my temples, and decided I'd follow them. Something in the hush, in the way Jonathan's mother had stormed out, told me that whatever Grandma Evelyn had saved for the end was going to shake our world. Contrived thing. Giles Hospital should have taken 10 minutes, but the road was slick from last night's mist, and I navigated the winding lanes precariously. My mind raced, my shoulders ached from clutching the steering wheel like a life raft. I envisioned Margaret's pale face, rigid as stone. What could have happened? When I arrived, I practically skidded into the visitor parking. My wedding dress, still pristine save for a few scuffs I couldn't see, caught the fluorescent lights of the emergency entrance. A security guard glanced at me quizzically as I dashed past the sliding doors without stopping. Inside, the smell of antiseptic and something sour, fear hit me like a fist. I paused by the reception desk, trying to catch my breath. "My husband and mother-in-law," I panted. "They came in just now." "Which way did they go?" The nurse looked up, her expression sympathetic. "They're in room 412, she said softly. "Second floor, west wing." It's not life-threatening, but it was urgent. My legs gave way beneath me. I would have sworn she said urgent, like a whispered condemnation. Without waiting, I bolted toward the elevators, thumb slamming the button again and again, a futile cadence of panic. The doors opened, and I poured in, pressed the button for 2, and prayed the doors wouldn't close on me. When they did, I sucked in a deep breath and forced myself to steady my racing heart. "Okay," I whispered, voice hollow. "This is fine, just fine." I caught my reflection in the metal wall, tear-streaked cheeks, mascara smudged beneath my eyes, the bodice of my dress glittering incongruously next to hospital wristbands. I wanted to rip it off, but the straps clung like reminders of a promise I hadn't yet broken. The elevator dinged, doors slid open, revealing a sterile hallway lined with pale green paint and doors labeled in blunt Helvetica. I sprinted past rooms 401, 402, 403, my shoes echoing like gunshots. At 412, I hesitated, hand frozen inches from the knob. "Laura?" The voice was soft, cautious. It was Jonathan. I swallowed. His mother's voice drifted from inside, sudden and fragile. "Please, Jonathan, just let me rest." My stomach knotted. I pushed the door open. They were huddled by the window, backlit by harsh morning light. My mother-in-law, Margaret, lay on the hospital bed, her tailored cardigan unbuttoned, one sleeve rolled to the elbow. Her skin was translucent under the bright lights. A small IV dripped quietly into her arm. Her hair, always so perfectly coiled, was mussed at the nape of her neck. She looked tiny. Jonathan knelt beside her, one hand on the IV pole, the other gently stroking her hair back from her forehead. He turned at the sound of the door, eyes wide. I froze. "Mum," he breathed, rising to meet me halfway, his face a map of worry and guilt. "Laura," I didn't let him finish. The room felt impossibly small, the air thick. I noticed the half-finished cup of tea on the bedside table, just where I remembered Grandma Evelyn leaving it when she'd had her heart attack 3 years ago. The tea had gone cold then, too. I sank into the lone chair near the foot of the bed. My wedding dress pooled around me like a broken promise. Jonathan touched my arm. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. I turned to him, voice raw. "Why am I here, Jonathan?" He glanced at Margaret, who rested her head on a pillow, eyes closed. There was something in his expression, shame, fear. If he'd been the truest man alive, I would have believed, but everything was collapsing too fast. Margaret stirred and opened her eyes. They were glassy, unfocused. She reached for my hand. My breath caught. "Laura," she whispered, voice thin and raspy, "you weren't supposed to see this." My pulse rattled in my throat. I gripped her hand. "See what?" Margaret blinked, as if surprised she was still awake. Then she cleared her throat and said, "The will reading is today. You're all gathered back at Hawthorne. You need to." "Hospital," Jonathan interjected, eyes flicking to me. "She collapsed right after she heard some things." "Things?" I echoed. Margaret's gaze drifted to the window. Outside, a nurse wheeled a cart, oblivious to the drama. Margaret squeezed my hand. The pressure was pathetic, but undeniable. "There are lies in that will," she said. "Evelyn left truths buried. Stuff about families that it changes everything." Jonathan sank onto the bed's edge, head in his hands. "Mum, please." But I couldn't look away. The threads of every conversation I'd ever had with Jonathan, every whispered promise, every laugh, tangled around something dark. I'd seen the way he avoided certain topics, the way his phone lit up with messages he deleted seconds later. Moments of distance, glossed over with excuses. Margaret's breathing hitched. "I shouldn't have told you," she rasped. "It's not my secret to share." "Tell me," I urged. Jonathan stood abruptly, hands clenched. "No, Laura, this isn't." I stood too, voice sharp. "It is. It's my life." He shook his head. "You can't handle this." I closed my eyes, saw the countless hours of doubt flash behind my eyelids. I'd brushed off the unease when he came home late, the ache in my chest when he grew silent at dinner. He'd always found a way to reassure me, until now. Margaret coughed, thin and sudden. Jonathan rushed to her side. I watched him cradle her head, with such tenderness I almost believed. Almost. Then my own phone buzzed in my clutch. I ignored it, but anxiety gnawed at me. Finally, Margaret forced her eyes open. "Laura," she said. She sounded older than death itself. "Promise me you'll go back. Promise you'll finish the reading. Don't." She coughed again. "Don't leave early." My knees trembled. I whispered, "Why? What is it?" Her fingers twitched around mine. "Because, whatever it is, it's in plain sight. And only when you see the look in your husband's eyes, only then will you know." She closed her eyes. Jonathan's shoulders shook with silent grief. I blinked back tears, my chest tight with a pain I didn't know how to name. Betrayal? Fear? The pieces of my world were crumbling. Outside the door, the corridor lights flickered. A distant intercom crackled. Somewhere, a timer beeped. I felt a strange calm wash over me, as though the storm had paused. I looked at Jonathan, his face shadowed with guilt, and then at my mother-in-law, whose shallow breaths tethered her to life. "I promise," I whispered, though my soul trembled. "I'll go back." Jonathan reached out, but I stepped back. The promise tasted like ash. I turned away. As I passed the door frame, I glanced back once. Margaret looked so small, so vulnerable, so human, and in her words lay my only clue. I walked into the hallway, each step echoing like a challenge. The elevator doors loomed. I would go back. I would sit through that reading, one final time, and I would find out exactly what my husband hid, and why he trembled beside his dying mother. But for now, I needed air and space and time to steady the storm in my chest. The doors closed on me. The elevator descended. And below, waiting in the grand drawing room, the rest of the family had no idea the real inheritance wasn't silver spoons or dusty cottages, but a secret that could rip us all apart. The elevator hesitated between floors, the lights flickering as if deciding whether to let me return to the storm. I clenched my fists, the fabric of my wedding dress bunching around my knuckles, and forced my breathing steady. When the doors finally slid open, I stepped out into the corridor with the same determination I'd had when I decided to marry Jonathan, head first, believing in love's promise. This time, though, I knew the promise was fractured. I retraced my steps past room 412, resisting the urge to glance inside one more time. Each door I passed reminded me of secrets, lovers meeting in hidden chambers, whispered confessions behind closed windows, and I realized our marriage, too, was built on silences. At the end of the hallway, the staircase beckoned. I took the steps two at a time, ragged breaths echoing off the walls. When I reached the ground floor, the hospital's usual hum seemed too small for the truth I carried. I emerged into the lobby, where the nurse from reception gave me a sympathetic nod. The world beyond those automatic doors, the manicured drive, the waiting cars, felt unreal, like a dream in which you know you're dreaming but can't wake up. I found my car exactly where I'd left it, dew settling on the windshield like tiny pearls. As I climbed in, I considered texting Jonathan, telling him I wouldn't come back, but I knew that walking away now would mean leaving everything unsaid, and I wasn't that kind of person. Even if my world was falling apart, I would not leave it without a fight. The drive back to Hawthorne Manor unwound smoothly, the road dry under an unexpectedly bright sun. I reached the gates and paused. The iron archway loomed above me, its scrolls like entangled questions. Inside, the manor looked peaceful, its stone facade washed in gold, but I knew what lay behind those walls: lies, long-hidden grudges, and a revelation that would shatter our carefully maintained facades. Inside the drawing room, the family sat in rapt attention. The lawyer, Mr. Benson, stood with Grandma Evelyn's final letter in hand. My Aunt Clara dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Uncle Miles tapped his foot impatiently. Distant cousins leaned forward, eager for their inheritance. And there, at the head of the mahogany table, sat Jonathan's mother, looking too composed, her silence almost theatrical. I drew a breath and stepped through the doors. All eyes turned to me. Laura, Jonathan's voice quavered from the back of the room. He had come to stand by the threshold, looking unsteady in his tuxedo jacket, his once crisp wedding attire now slightly rumpled, as if he'd been pacing. His gaze met mine, full of 1,000 questions. I slipped into the room and took the seat at my usual place, beside him. He exhaled, relief mingled with dread. Mr. Benson cleared his throat. "Shall we proceed?" Aunt Clara nodded, her pearls chiming like a warning. "Please." The hush descended again. Outside, a gust rattled the windows. I felt Margaret's words in my mind. "Only when you see the look in his eyes." Jonathan's hands were folded on the table, knuckles white. He glanced at me, lips parted as if to speak, then closed his mouth. The lawyer unfolded the letter. "To my dearest family," he began, his voice resonant. "I leave more than my silver spoons and dusty cottages. I leave a piece of truth I have guarded since the day I lost my husband, your grandfather. I ask you to listen with open hearts, to forgive as you find the courage." I leaned forward. The air felt thick, every breath tasting of finality. "I have known secrets, and I have held them close to spare you pain, but pain grows in the dark, and now I wish for my family to live in light, especially my darling son, Jonathan." Jonathan's head jerked up at the mention of his name. His eyes were wide, haunted. "I was not always the elegant matriarch you knew," the lawyer read on, "and your grandfather was not always the faithful husband. Before he wed me, he fathered a child, your half-brother Thomas, born of a fleeting wartime affair with a young nurse. He begged me to keep silent, to shield his reputation and spare the boy a scandal. I agreed, and we raised him here at Hawthorne, as my own, never telling you the truth." Aunt Clara gasped. Uncle Miles muttered. My throat constricted. Jonathan swallowed hard, eyes fixed on a spot behind me. "In my final days," the letter continued, "I have carried the weight of that choice. I have watched Thomas grow into the man your mother disapproved of. Him whose existence she pretended not to know, whose semblance to your grandfather you refused to acknowledge. I am sorry for deceiving you, my son. And for the rift it caused with your mother. Jonathan's mother, Margaret, stiffened, her face drained of color. I couldn't tear my eyes from her. Aunt Clara clutched the letter, and her knuckles turned chalky. The room spun. I blinked and swallowed. My heart raced. The world as I knew it cracked. Mr. Benson paused. That concludes the reading. Silence screamed in my ears. Then Jonathan stood, voice hollow. This is impossible. Margaret shuddered in her seat. I never wanted you to know, she whispered, her voice brittle. I loved Thomas as a brother, but I could never bear his claim. Her words trailed off. Thomas, a man in his early 30s, handsome but weathered, stepped through the door that led to the library. He carried himself with quiet dignity, and for a heartbeat, the room held its breath. I looked at Jonathan, then at Thomas. The resemblance was striking, the same strong jawline, the same inquisitive eyes. I realized the conflict that must have torn Margaret apart, her grief for a secret sibling, her anger at the wound it inflicted. Thomas approached the table, inclining his head to Mr. Benson. Thank you for your mother's letter, he said softly. I've spent my life distancing myself from this house, but I never ran from the truth. I hope now we can reconcile. Margaret's lips trembled. She rose, tottered, then let herself collapse back into her chair, overcome. Jonathan closed the distance to his brother in 2 strides, then paused awkwardly. They stood facing one another, fatherless sons, bound by a mother's confession. Jonathan's voice cracked. Why now? Why send me away today, mother? Margaret lifted her fist to her mouth, tears spilling free. I thought if you never saw him, you'd never know. Thomas stepped forward. I'm not here for revenge. I confess there are scars of rejection, of silence. But that's in the past. I want you to know me as your brother. Jonathan's breath came in ragged bursts. He reached for Thomas, then hesitated, turning his gaze to me. His eyes bore into mine, not with accusation, but with raw fear. I squeezed his hand under the table. My heart ached for both of them. I saw the boy Jonathan once, was full of curiosity, love, and trust, and I realized the weight of the lie he'd carried unknowingly. I remembered the hidden messages, the secret phone calls, but now I understood their origin. I don't know what to say, Jonathan whispered. Thomas cleared his throat. Perhaps nothing yet, but I'm here. Margaret coughed, voice thin. Evelyn said that only when you saw the look in your husband's eyes, you would know. She gazed at me, then at the 2 men, and I knew, upon hearing Evelyn's words, that you'd understand. My chest tightened. I thought of the life Jonathan and I had planned. Children, family dinners, quiet nights reading by the fire. The foundation of that life had been rocked by a truth none of us had imagined. Aunt Clara dabbed at her eyes. She sniffled. Family, she murmured. We are still family. Uncle Miles closed the letter and placed it on the table. We'll need to decide on the estate, he said, voice gruff. But perhaps we should pause. Mr. Benson nodded. We can reconvene tomorrow. I rose, drawing in a shaky breath. Jonathan rose too, and together we stepped away from the table. Thomas watched us, uncertainty etched on his face. Laura, Jonathan said, voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry you had to. I held up my hand. Don't apologize. This is about them. I touched his arm gently, and now we choose what happens next. He swallowed. I don't know if I can forgive my mother. Thomas exhaled. I don't know if I can forgive her either, but maybe we can forgive each other. I looked at them, the brothers separated by betrayal, reunited by blood. One step at a time, I whispered. That's all any of us can do. In that moment, I realized that inheritance isn't silver spoons or cottages. It's truth, and the courage to face it. Grandma Evelyn's final gift wasn't a treasure. It was a chance for our fractured family to begin again. As the family filed out of the drawing room, I lingered. Outside, the sun had broken through clouds, casting a warm glow over the estate gardens. I took Jonathan's hand. He met my gaze, awe and love mingling in his eyes. We have a long road, he said. I nodded. Together. And as we stepped into the golden light, I felt the weight in my chest shift, not gone, but different. I didn't know what the future held for us, but I knew this. Our story was our own to write, in truth or in shadows. And for the first time, I chose truth.